Have you ever heard statistics or studies about people who are overweight or obese having a more difficult time with breastfeeding, having lower rates of breastfeeding success, ceasing breastfeeding earlier, and producing less breast milk? I've been digging into some of these studies and I want to talk about it because it's a little more nuanced than what you might think. So, let's get into it. If you want to have less anxiety and more confidence so that your parenting journey can feel like you always wanted it to feel, then go to my website right now so that you can have a person by your side who not only knows how you feel, but who combines my expertise of lactation with your expertise of your body and your baby to help you make the next right step in your lactation journey, because that's all you really need to do is make the next right step. And right now, that next right step is going to my website, www.quavinbirthservices.com. And I can't wait to see your name pop up in my inbox or on my phone, on my text messages. Talk to you soon. Okay, so last week, if you missed it, you might want to go back because I talked about this question that is everywhere on the internet having to do with weight loss and breastfeeding. You cannot go into a postpartum support group online or a breastfeeding specific support group online and not hear. You cannot go into a postpartum support group or a breastfeeding specific support group and avoid the question of how to lose weight while breastfeeding, because we are surrounded by diet culture. We're surrounded by this idea that as women, as people in bodies that bear children, we should not look like we have born children. We are now starting to understand as healthcare providers that a focus on weight can actually cause people to increase their weight over time. Because each time someone commits to caloric deprivation, and then we start adding back in calories, because that's what our brains are telling us to do, then we put on not only the weight that we might have lost throughout that deprivation, but more. And so then over time, weight increases when we have a deprivation mindset. And so focusing on weight, shaming people for their weight, not believing people when they have true illnesses or when they're struggling with something like breastfeeding, and just assuming that they're struggling because of their weight is problematic. So let's dive into the research a little bit. You've heard me now for a few months talking about how much I've enjoyed getting home-cooked meals delivered right to my front door from feastandfettle.com. And I'm here today to tell you that if you know somebody who is in the postpartum period, who you would like to provide true support to, that you should go to feastandfettle.com and order home-cooked meals to be delivered right to their front door. One of the biggest barriers to breastfeeding success is a lack of support. A new parent is feeding a baby up to 15 times a day. How on earth do we expect that person to feed that baby that many times, also feed themselves, and provide meals to other members of their family? There's not enough time. You know how hard it is as a busy parent yourself to try to put meals on the table. Go to feastandfettle.com, use my code MILK, M-I-L-K, coordinate which meals they would like to have delivered, and send them a week's worth of delicious meals. And be the person eases the burden for them. What a gift. I can't think of a better way to support somebody in the postpartum period. Now, it is true that when you focus just on weight, that we can conclude that women with higher BMIs are more likely to give up breastfeeding and have problems associated with breastfeeding. It is also true that they are less likely to start skin-to-skin contact. They are less likely to start breastfeeding within the first hour. And they are less likely to be exclusively breastfeeding by the time they are discharged from the hospital. They also have a higher perception of late lactogenesis, meaning when you ask them in these studies that are run, did your milk come in on time? Or when did your milk come in fully? Or did you have enough milk for your baby? They tend to report that their milk came in later. So this does play out in the research. But what I am here to question is why. What I am here to question is why. Because these studies are taking place in hospital settings, not in home birth settings, not in birth center settings, where families have more control over what happens during the birth and directly after the birth. And so, yes, we know, most of us going into birth by now, that skin-to-skin contact is really good for babies, and it is also really good for our milk supply. But if skin-to-skin contact is not being initiated after birth, why? Why is that happening? Why aren't babies that are being delivered from women with higher BMIs being delivered directly and put on those parents' chests? Why are they not getting the help they need to right away begin breastfeeding? If we as healthcare professionals working in the postpartum period know that somebody who might have a higher body mass index might have more difficulty breastfeeding, then why are we not saying, okay, this person who has said they want to breastfeed, who has said it's important to them, and who may have more difficulty given the data, we need to make sure we have a lactation consultant available to them. We need to make sure that the nurse who is caring for them is not displaying explicit bias about their body size and is willing to help them get latched immediately. Because what we are also seeing in the studies is that there is a lot of bias in the healthcare settings for the pregnant and postpartum woman who has a higher body mass index. One study found that among med students in the United States, 74% of them harbored implicit weight bias and 67% reported explicit weight bias. Furthermore, these negative attitudes towards individuals with overweight and obesity were stronger than bias towards racial minorities, sexual minorities, and individuals of low socioeconomic status. So this is a big deal in the healthcare setting. It is more likely that somebody with a high BMI is going to encounter a bias that is going to impact their health outcomes than somebody of a racial minority, which in and of itself is likely, right? So what happens when this implicit or explicit bias exists? Why does it impact the pregnant or postpartum person? Because often when somebody has a high BMI, that's the only number the provider is looking at. And many of us know that the BMI chart is a very outdated way to look at health. So they're looking at the number on the scale, they're using the BMI chart, and they're not asking about any other measures of health. They might ask, what are you eating? What did you eat yesterday for breakfast, lunch, and dinner? But they're not using any other measures. They're not asking about what they like to do to move their body. They're not asking about their access to nutritious foods. They're not asking about how many steps they take in a day. They're not asking about if they have access to being able to move their bodies. So this implicit and explicit bias of just looking at a person's body and determining how healthy they are based on that and an outdated BMI chart does lead to worse outcomes. There is more weight shaming going on. There's more testing that's happening. There is more fear mongering happening that there might be complications with the birth when all other indications are such that the baby is healthy. There are more separations at birth that are happening for unnecessary testing based on everything that is going on. And so these biases then impact the lactation outcomes. Because if a mom and baby are separated for precautionary reasons because somebody's weight is high, well, then that is going to lead to delayed lactogenesis. It's going to lead to a delay in the milk coming in. Just like with C-sections, we know that one of the reasons the milk comes in a little later with C-sections is because often the babies get whisked away unnecessarily. They are not put right on the parent's chest, and they are not given the opportunity to nurse often and frequently at the beginning. And it is the same with parents whose babies are in the NICU. Often their milk is delayed in coming in because those parents, even the ones who desperately want to breastfeed, are told it is more important for them to rest and that they can start pumping later than to get their milk supply going immediately. And this can lead to long-term struggles with milk supply. So we know that from one study, which I will link in the show notes, that 501 pregnant and postpartum women participated in. Nearly 1 in 5 women reported experiencing weight stigma in healthcare settings in the postpartum and pregnancy phase of their life. And these experiences occurred between less than once a month and a few times a month. Obstetricians were the most commonly reported source, followed by nurses. They reported feeling judged, shamed, and guilty because of their weight during the healthcare visits. Additionally, 37 participants reported having to change providers because of treatment regarding their weight. Many also reported that they expected to feel or had felt uncomfortable seeking help with breastfeeding from a healthcare professional. And the 4 themes that came out of this study were negative attitudes and unkind or disrespectful treatment from providers, evaluative comments about their weight, healthcare providers focusing on their high-risk status and potential negative consequences, often when birth outcomes were ultimately healthy, and inappropriate or demeaning comments. And I just yesterday posted a TikTok video about this, asking people who had higher BMIs or larger bodies if they had experienced this. And I got some stories about this, things that were said to people that were completely inappropriate, like, oh man, your baby is a chunker just like her mom. And this was after the nurse insisted that the mom push when the mom felt like it wasn't a good idea and it resulted in a broken clavicle of the baby. So this weight stigma undermines the relationship between the patients and the providers and leads to worse outcomes. If there is so much weight stigma happening in the perinatal period, we cannot draw a straight line between obesity and worse breastfeeding outcomes. We have to look at how people with higher BMIs are being supported to feed their babies compared to people with lower BMIs. Because if they are not being helped, if it is being assumed that they will not be able to feed their babies, if they are being separated from their babies unnecessarily, if the nurses or the lactation consultants who are in the hospital do not know how to help a person with a bigger body latch their baby, that is problematic. And it does lead to reduced outcomes. But it might not be for the reasons we think it is. And so, yes, there are some things that can happen with higher BMI that researchers have found, like less room for the mammary glands to grow if there is more fat in the breasts, or higher levels of estrogen that is produced, because excess body fat can release more estrogen. People with higher body fat also have a higher occurrence of metabolic syndromes. It's always been thought that the higher body fat is causing the metabolic syndromes, which can lead to more lactation difficulties. But this is now being questioned. It could be that the metabolic syndromes are actually what is causing people to hold on to more fat cells. So this is a chicken and egg situation that bias in research or in healthcare has made it difficult for us to find solutions to. We can't just say that somebody with higher BMI is going to have a less likelihood of breastfeeding until we start to just help the people who are in front of us to breastfeed their babies in the way that they would like to, with as much care and attention as we would everyone else, regardless of their body size. And so if you are somebody who has a larger BMI, and you feel like your larger BMI got in the way of a great breastfeeding experience because of the way you were treated, I want to hear from you. I would love for you to pop into my Milk Making Minutes community group or find me on social media. It's all linked in the show notes, and tell me about it. If you would like to be a guest of the show to talk about it, I would love to hear that too. If you are somebody who provides lactation care, I encourage you to understand that you just have to treat the person that is in front of you. Because oftentimes, these studies aren't looking at the big picture. And yes, we need to rely on studies to understand what is happening in the healthcare setting. But sometimes there are biases that are happening even within the studies. There are assumptions being made that are not being accounted for when the conclusions are made. And with that, if you are feeding a baby or you know somebody who is, I highly recommend you go to feastandfettle.com and get $30 off using my code MILK and have home-cooked meals delivered right to your door or to their door so that you have one less thing to worry about. Who wants to be worrying about cooking when there's so much to do this fall? So go and order and let me know what you think. Have a great weekend. Bye.